Okay, recording is in progress. So let me just say what Mark and I were thinking about for today, and see if Mark has any remarks, and then we can just kind of jump into continuing our discussion around potential recommendations. So you all should have received a cleaned up document from last time, listening to what everyone said, trying to add some things that folks had suggested, taking off some things that there were some negative reactions to. And so we're left with a lot of recommendations, many of which I don't think we have a sense yet of support or opposition for. I think perhaps we're not ready to vote yet, but we want to, as Mark said just before you all got on, to take your temperature, to kind of understand where everybody is coming from with regard to the whole array of recommendations that we have. So so we thought the best approach would be, I was originally thinking that we would kind of go through quickly and just see if there was any that there's no opposition to. But now I'm worried that if we do that, then we won't circle back around on some and understand the nature of the opposition, because we have 2 hours. So I want to make sure that we get through the whole every recommendation to understand what the outstanding concerns, issues, questions, certainly opposition that may not be able to be removed from it is. So that's how we were planning on moving forward. It's my turn to chair, so I'll be facilitating the discussion and just moving through one by one on the recommendations. But Mark, I don't know if you wanted to weigh in about any remarks that you want to make.
Thanks, Ann. No, I don't. I mean, you said it well, so I think we can just fire away.
Okay, great. Anybody else want to weigh in at this point before we jump in? Okay, terrific. So again, if you put your hand up, I will be able to see it, I think. If I'm not seeing you, feel free to just jump in. But Cameron has put up the recommendations so we can all see them on the screen before us, and he's going to be moving it about for us. So let's jump right in. Actually, what I would like to do, Cameron, just so you understand, is kind of just go through what the major categories are, the categories that are in bold there. And the purpose of that is that we tried to match them to the legislation. So we got them really exactly from what the legislature tasked us to look at, because we wanted to make sure that the legislature asked us to look at certain issues and concerns and factors. And so I just want to review with you kind of how the document is laid out before we start right at the beginning. So the first issue is qualification and registration criteria. And then the next one at the bottom there is complaint resolution. And then the next one is training and recruitment. The following one is public awareness and education strategies. The next one is advertising. And then the last one is best practices nationwide. So those all correspond to what the legislature asked us to look at, each of those categories. So we tried to group the recommendations that were coming forth in those categories. And they, you may tell us that they're in the wrong category or whatever, but that's how the document is organized. So if you're, if we're in this first issue area of qualification and registration criteria, and you know you have an issue that you want to raise about training or advertising, it'll come later in the discussion today. Okay, any questions? Okay, all right, so then let's dive right in. One of the first recommendations had to do with enhancing, as somebody put it, the stringency of the registration process. And there were a few ways to get to that. One of which was the state providing compliance checks. So not just taking the application at face value, or the information that's provided to the state at face value, but the state actually being more proactive and providing compliance checks. And actually, I'm going to stop there before I mention the next two, because I think it's really clear that most, if not all, of the recommendations are going to have some cost associated with it. Some resources are going to be necessary. So at some point, we may want to prioritize, because this is probably an area where we need to think about, how much can the industry bear, frankly, because right now we pay for state oversight through industry fees. So if DCP has 2 people currently on staff, and all of a sudden they're going to have 10 people on staff doing this work, that does the fee go up by 5 times? So I just wanted to put that out there, that yes, there are probably a lot of great practices that we could put into place, but we do also kind of need to think about the feasibility of doing everything on the list. So that's the first subcategory. The next one, should I stop there and just, we can talk about the state providing compliance checks? Is there, what's folks' reaction to that?
I'll just say, as long as DCP has the necessary resources, we don't have any, we only have concerns about lack of resources.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And Sheldon first, and then Michael.
So, Anne, you said something just a moment ago that was news to me, that you said that it's the industry paying for basically the regulation through. So I didn't know that. And I guess there's a question of and therefore, what can the industry bear? There is, it's possible for the state to supplement that. It's possible for the state to, pay for as well. And then, of course, now that's more of a political problem as opposed to what the industry can bear problem. But I was just saying, I really appreciate that, because I didn't know that. And I think we may have to think about that as we go forward, because, I don't know, but a recommendation might be that we think this needs to happen and that needs to happen. We think it needs to be adequately funded, and possibly we think that to the extent it's unrealistic to expect the industry to fund that, there needs to be additional funding coming from appropriations from the legislature. Just a thought.
Okay, thank you, Sheldon. Michael.
Hi, thank you. And I think this is a great list of potential recommendations. Yeah, without question, first and foremost, as everyone has stated, it's going to be very difficult for us really to achieve much success if the financial constraints continue as far as the Department of Consumer Protection goes, simply because of lack of manpower, oversight, and enforcement. But I think what was just mentioned, and I really never thought about it, and I think I personally, being a home care owner, I don't think it's a bad idea at all. Now, if funding is our greatest issue, without a doubt, then maybe perhaps we should look into and recommend that instead of $375, it should be more. And I would have absolutely no issue with that, because I think one of the biggest issues, without question, is the saturation of agencies in our industry, and it is much too easy to become a home care owner. And also, my biggest point was, so yeah. In other words, I think that's definitely an idea, because a lot of people, I find that, it's not only the public, but I feel, I'm in my 9th year now of owning a home care agency, but without question, I think a lot of people in our industry, as far as healthcare professionals, our industry is kind of frowned upon in a way, because they are being constantly bombarded by so many agencies day in and day out, and somehow, some way, we have to streamline it. So I think that would be I would have no issue at all if we had an issue with funding from the state. Hopefully, they'll fund some and significantly, but even if they raise it to $1,000 a year, it wouldn't even budge, because it would behoove the quality home care agencies, because perhaps the ones running out of their living rooms, might not be able to do it. So that's my input.
Great. Thank you, Michael. That's really helpful, and is actually a great segue to, Tracy has a comment. Tracy?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Michael said. I agree that 375 is perhaps too reasonable. And the number of agencies that have registered, when DCB did their presentation showing almost a 200% increase in agencies over a 10-year time period, it's too easy. There aren't enough requirements. And perhaps if it's a little more expensive, some of that money can be put toward oversight. The other thing I was thinking of, but it may not work across for all of the agencies, is many of the agencies, I think it's about a third of them, at least 350 or so, I believe, provide waiver services through the state funding, which is with federal match dollars. So I don't know if any of that can be put toward, if there can be some process. Sheldon probably could speak to whether that's even possible or not. I'm not sure. But is that anything to also get some funding through approps to, have any kind of a match to be able to build on a compliance oversight process?
It seems like any additional funding would have to come through the appropriations process. Yeah. And any of the federal funding that's coming through now is devoted to specific services. Okay. Did anybody have anything they wanted to say in response to what Tracy said or Michael said? Okay. And I think both of those comments are a good segue to the next recommendation. But before I do that, does anybody have any concerns about the state doing more in terms of providing compliance checks? I know Leslie spoke up and said, hey, if we have the money to do it, we can do that if that's what the legislation says. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, that's a thumbs up, Tracy. That's not a raised hand. Okay. Anybody else? So we will, Michael, did you want to, Senator Miller, I'm sorry. I didn't see
That's
her.
okay. Hello, everyone. So I think that we do need to be conscious of the spending, but it would be my recommendation that we as the task force look at what we think needs to be done and don't put so much weight on whether the General Assembly will be able to fund it. That's what we do, in that we put forth legislation and then we try to work out the funding if possible. But I would prefer if we present all of our recommendations that we think should come from this task force, and then whatever we'll worry about part B of it later. Because sometimes we can find the funding and sometimes we can't. So that's why I'm just recommending that we don't necessarily worry about the funding, whether it will be funded or not at this point.
Okay. And since I'm not with OPM anymore, I'll follow your lead on that. Michael?
I realize that there's just 2 inspectors. They certainly are overwhelmed and have a lot to do. And I was just curious, because this question was never raised. They do perform audits throughout the year. My question would be, now, the audits that they perform, are they done because of complaints filed? Or do they actually do X amount of surprise audits per year? Because I sincerely believe that surprise audits should be significantly increased, because I think a lot of agencies are lax, and they kind of gamble and they say, oh, they're never going to audit us. They're never going to come out here. There's no oversight there. There's just too many of us, so on and so forth, as we know. So I think that should be definitely considered. The number of surprise audits increased to put a little fear in some, into the agency's owners.
Sorry, I can't figure out how to raise my hand now that my screen is smaller. I apologize. So
That's fine. You go
Okay.
ahead, Leslie.
So I just have a few things. First, compliance audits are more extensive than compliance checks. That's more extensive. So I just want to flag that. And Pam Brown is here as well, our director of investigation, so she can speak to what happens now when it comes to audits. But they are much more extensive than a compliance check and would require more resources. And I totally appreciate Senator Miller's comments about not worrying about this, but having been at the agency level now and working for DCP for since the beginning of 2016, I know, and this is why Ann said she doesn't work at OPM anymore, so okay. But when we don't speak up and talk about how we'll need resources, then it is held against us later. So if we don't flag that we'll need resources, and if we don't talk about what the costs will be, then it can get lost, and then I'm not doing my job, and we end up with something we can't do because we don't have the resources. So I just totally understand we should have everything out there, but I think it would be irresponsible of me if I didn't flag what's going to require resources, and so that everyone can understand their costs associated with many of these proposals.
Thank you, Leslie. And I hope you will continue to do that as we go through these. And just to say it, I think we've all recognized it, that even if we did nothing, even if we had no recommendations, it's clear that DCP is under-resourced for the work that you currently have. I think that I can't remember if that's a recommendation or not, but certainly in order for DCP to be responding to the current complaints that they get, you all ought to have some additional resources. That's my feeling anyway. Tracy, did you want to say something on this?
Yeah, just quickly, based on what Senator Miller recommended just a few minutes ago, and then I support Leslie's comments fully. Senator Miller, if we're putting forth recommendations and we know that there are, significant resources that probably will be attached to some of them, do you recommend that we put them in any specific priority order?
Thank you for saying that, for asking me that question, because I had my hand raised to address that. So I'm sorry if I misspoke or I was misinterpreted by saying that we should do nothing. And so I didn't say that. I said we need to be conscious of it, but I don't want that to be a hindrance to the recommendation that comes out of this task force. The whole purpose of this task force is to improve the industry. That's the purpose of the task force. And so if it means that we need to put some resources behind it, then let's look at that. So yes, I think that what I was going to say, highlight those or put them in order. You can highlight the ones that you think that are important and put that, highlight them to say that they're going to require resources, right? But I just don't think that we should, because it costs the state monies, that we should ignore those. Because it may be something that's very important that the state must do. We're aging. And we have to protect the older adults and the aging population of our state. So I apologize if my comment was interpreted as we shouldn't worry about it. No, we should, but we should also think about having the political will to do what we need to do to protect the aging population of the state. So yes, I don't think that we should ignore the fact that it costs money. We should highlight it. And so thank you, Tracy, for bringing that up, because I was going to suggest something to that nature.
Great, thank you, Senator. Pam?
Yes, I just wanted to address the question that was on the table, and as a follow-up to Leslie, we do conduct random checks. So we have 2 special investigators. They're actually audits, and they spend quite a bit of a time in each of the agency's office. It could be 4 hours, it could be a full day, it could be a couple of days, but we do random checks and we show up. The agency is a little discombobulated, if you will, because they have to now set aside a room for us. They've got to pull all these folders for employees and for their clients, but we do the random checks and we do them as much as we possibly can. Again, keeping in mind that we have 2 special investigators assigned. Thank you.
Pam, is it possible to quantify, how much you do in regard to random compliance checks? Because I think there was a sense that the group would like to see more of that, see that enhanced. And so I guess the question to start with is, do you have, you do 3 agencies a quarter? Do you have any information for us to let us know how often that happens?
Sure. So initially we were doing at least 2 random audits a week per investigator. Though it depends on, what else we have to deal with. We get complaints in, so we're not always able to meet that. We're also doing website checks. 600 websites were reviewed last year with the assistance of an intern. Because there's a lot going on in that area.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful as a kind of a baseline. So if you had more investigators, then obviously you would have more compliance checks being done.
Correct.
Great. Senator, you have your hand up. Do you have more?
Sorry, let me lower it now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else? So what I'm hearing, and I just want to check in, no one is in opposition to the state providing additional compliance checks. Is that right? So we will keep that on our list, and let's move to the next recommendation, which is limiting the number of agencies statewide. And then somebody mentioned the certificate of need process. I will actually weigh in that I don't think that the certificate of need process is the right process by which to do this. It's a medical model. It's meant to make sure that physicians have enough patients, frankly, to keep their skills up to date, so that you're not going to a physician who is a cardiac physician but only has 1 patient a year because there's so many cardiac physicians. That's kind of the thought behind it. I don't think that the certificate of need process is the right process for limiting the number of agencies, but I would love to hear from folks about the concept of limiting the number of agencies. And Senator Miller, do you have your hand up now?
Yes, I do, and I'm sorry, something just occurred to me, just to go back to number one, and this is for any of these items, recommendations that will require additional funding. If and I don't know if you, Madam Chair, and your co-chair had decided to do this or not, but if we can say why it will cost the state monies, like the state, in order to do the compliant checks, we need additional investigators. And if we can narrow down to the numbers, it'd be great, but just so that we'll know why and what doing that particular, not that particular recommendation, what will be required to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that and DCP would be helpful in that regard, but obviously knowing that, you know, an investigator can do 2 random compliance checks a week, in addition to their other duties, we can kind of figure, you know, the cost of that, but we will be looking to DCP to cost some of these items out in kind of a general way. Okay, Maria?
Thank you. And I'm sorry about my webcam. It doesn't want to work today. But I wanted to agree with Ann about the certificate of need process. It seems like we would go from, you know, very little oversight to kind of a maximum level. And that, you know, that is an extensive process, as you pointed out. And we're a small agency in Southeastern Connecticut. We often have a wait list to take on clients. So I think this, you know, these references to too many agencies doing business, it must be regional. And I would just point that out. So I think Ann was spot on with her response. Thanks.
Thanks, Maria. And Michael? Michael, do you have you're muted?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I totally understand everyone has a right to make a living, and well, and it might be again using the term frowned upon by the state. Well, I think right now New York's the only state in the country that has a cap on agencies. But it is of great concern because if we keep using that word funding, if additional funding, we can't find the money to hire additional investigators, then what's going to happen is, you know, went from 356 agencies in, I believe, what, 2012 or 14 to over 900 now. So how are we possibly going to improve the industry if we don't provide more stringent compliance checks for people entering the industry, or a hard cap, simply because in 3 years we might have 1,500 agencies all of a sudden, and maybe 3 people doing the investigating. So I think this is really, you know, should really be looked at further.
Thank you. And let me just offer a couple of things. I see that Leslie has her hand up, so I think that will be helpful response. But I heard you say either enhanced compliance checks or limiting the number statewide. Is that kind of an either or for you, or tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, I'm saying if I personally think there should be a cap, but I think I don't think that's gonna fly. So because of what I just mentioned, so if we can't provide the cap, then the other option would be, without question, is more stringent compliance checks to be able to get certification, because it's just growing. And it might be regional, I don't know, but I know in New Haven and Fairfield County, there's an abundance of agencies, and it's not good, because a lot of agencies are just literally running out of their living rooms, and I think that should be discussed also. But you know, a lot of people just are lowballing everybody, so that's That's not good. So that would be my suggestion.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And I'm going to go to Leslie and then Tracy. But I'm wondering, I have a question perhaps for Leslie. Is it the number of agencies, or is it that we have so many agencies that are so small? And should we be thinking about that agencies need to, have 5 employees or 10 employees or something like that to be considered an agency? So I'll just throw that out there. I have no idea if that makes sense, but Leslie, why don't you go ahead?
Well, I think I would just start by talking about capping on anything and the challenges that a regulatory agency faces when there are limits to how many licenses or credentials we can issue. So we have caps on package stores, for example, at the municipal, their municipal caps. It becomes quite competitive and it's real challenging. So, so I don't know how you would determine how to cap, not just if it's regional, but so what happens if how does then DCP determine who they're awarding the credential to? Is it first come, first serve? Those are real sort of challenges. And at a time when it seems like there's a huge demand for these services, I think capping could be a real problem. It could drive costs up more and be real problematic for families who are, again, as the state continues to push for aging in place. So I'm not sure that, but as a regulatory agency, it's challenging when there are caps on licenses. It becomes a real challenge for us in terms of the competitive nature of those who are looking for the credentials. So the other thing I would just say, and in terms of limiting, saying an agency has to have at least 5 employees, then we are, again, that goes to further regulation, for their oversight. I don't know if Pam wants to speak to that a little as well, but I think, again, it would be, it would add to what we're doing. Obviously, not that most of these things don't, but I'm not sure how many restrictions you want to place on these, on DCP in terms of awarding credentials or on the applicants for credentials.
Okay, let's hear from Tracy.
Yeah, I hear everything Leslie's saying, and we certainly don't want to make it harder for DCP. We want to try to figure out a way where we can have some improved oversight and not jump all the way, to a cap process. It seems like it's rather rigid to go from, not enough staff to do the oversight to all of a sudden putting a cap and then requiring DCP to oversee that process. I think we need to look at some incremental steps in between. If it's something we can put in place that would give DCP the ability to do better compliance checks, or more, not better, but more, and just have some other process for registering. I just think it's too easy, as I had mentioned before, but putting a cap is it's going to the complete other end too quickly.
Okay, Maria and then Pam.
Well, this is just quick. I mean, we talk about the growth in these agencies. You just have to look at demographics. I mean, the need has really expanded so much over the past 10, 15 years. I think that's why we're seeing so much growth. And then as we move forward, you're going to continue to see that grow. So I do think capping would be a bit of a challenge.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Pam?
Yes, I just wanted to speak on the number of employees that was just raised. It is in the definition 20-670 that describes that a homemaker companion agency is a public or private organization that employs 1 or more persons. So that's already in the definition. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And so I guess my question, and nobody seems to be jumping on it, which is totally fine, thinks that there's any reason to raise that number. I don't know. I think it would actually help DCP because you would have less agencies of some of those really small ones combined. But I don't know. And I guess not. So it seems like there is not a consensus around limiting the number of agencies statewide. So, oh, look, this Cameron is taking it off right as we speak. So unless somebody objects, I think that we'll probably cross that one off. Okay. Okay, so then the next one is I guess there were concerns raised certainly in the public hearing, thinking that the agencies were not performing the required background checks that are required, and by trying to get more compliance with that, requiring a signed affidavit. So I will hear from what folks think about that idea.
I guess I'll go first. Sorry, I keep forgetting I have to go down to the bottom of the screen to raise my hand. I guess the question would be sort of how, this may not actually require a lot of resources, believe it or not, for DCP. It just depends on sort of the logistics of this. Would this be that they have to sign an affidavit upon renewal or when they apply? Would they have to submit affidavits each time they hire someone? So the level of, that sort of that's the question I guess I have. But if it's upon renewal that they have to submit an affidavit that they have X amount of employees and they attest that they have, conducted the legally required background checks for all of them, that would be something that would be manageable.
Okay, thank you. Maria?
And I would just agree, it's a great idea. And if we're going to go back to bullet 1, where there are more compliance checks, that should be one of the first items on there. We're going to pull X files and make sure you did your background check. So I think it's a smart idea.
The one other thing too, Anne, that the law was changed effective January 1 for background checks. So prior to January 1 of this year, there was a lot more gray area. And in the new definition of comprehensive background check, it's very specific on the steps that the agencies need to take. So this is something that will show up as a red flag to DCP when they're doing compliance checks and or other audits of agencies. So there's a lot less gray area now. So this is one that will have some kind of self-correcting, if you will, now that the law has been improved.
Okay, so are there folks who are opposed to this? It seems like, Mark, you're saying perhaps it's not going to make a big difference because there's already something that's been put into place that will self-correct. But I heard a couple of folks thinking that it was perhaps not a bad idea. Is there anybody who's opposed to it? Okay, so we will leave that on the list as a recommendation, but specify that it's upon initial application or upon renewal, so that DCP is not flooded by affidavits every time someone is hired. Okay. Okay, so then we'll move on. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I like what Maria said though about if we are going to be recommending more compliance checks, having that right at the top of the list when they're doing their compliance checks. Not just at renewal, but when they're coming in, just like DPH would do when they come into a home health agency. If there's, they have a checklist of things they have to follow.
Okay, that's great. And maybe Cameron can just add on that first sub bullet, including or prioritizing background checks. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. then if there's no further questions on that, we'll move on to permitted services, which has been something that has been raised a number of times. And honestly, if we start to be spending too much time on this one, I might move us along, because I think this is one of the major areas of discussion. But the issue here is, I guess there were two things that we were hearing, one of which was to expand the scope of services that are permitted to include the non-medical personal care assistance with activities of daily living, including medication reminders is what I heard, and the other activities of daily living. And then the second one was kind of renaming the agencies to better reflect that they're kind of a full range of non-medical home care agencies. So the two kind of go together. And I know Leslie has her hand up on this one.
Thanks. So I'll start with the easy one first. Renaming the agencies makes sense, I think, to really clarify that these are non-medical services. I would actually say non-medical home service agencies, just to sort of make it very clear. In terms of expanding the scope of services, I'm a little confused because the services listed there, are putting aside the PCA issue, which is sort of its own sort of unique issue, but the assistance with activities of daily living, including medication reminders and transfers and ambulation, like a lot of bathing, a lot of these things are already permitted. The PCA issue, and Pam can speak to some of this as well, but the PCA issue is the real challenge here, because by definition, they can provide a medical service, which is administering meds. And that's the challenge we have with the PCA issue. But so I think a lot of this is already within the scope. It's just, if we're talking PCAs, that's the challenge, because they do have one medical service they provide under the law. They can.
Okay, that's really helpful, that distinction there about administering meds being kind of the crucial point here. Tracy, do you want to say something about this?
Yeah, I guess I have concerns too, because obviously none of us really support PCAs administering meds, but well, I don't think any of us support them administering meds. I shouldn't say that so blanketly. But I do think that the PCA role, in some way, we've got to figure out how to get it into the definitions of the regulations, and then what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do. And if it's a PCA under state waiver, they're not allowed to do the medication. They're only allowed to do reminders. So it's a specific language in the state law from when, I think it was 2012, when we updated the RN delegation to home health aides to be able to give meds after being trained. And I think there was just one section in that law that has something about PCA, agency-based PCAs. And that's, maybe we need to look at that, because I don't think any of us are supporting PCAs administering meds, but we are supporting reminders.
Right. Reminders are permissible now.
Right.
The PCA piece, yeah, just so everyone knows it, I think it was 2012, Tracy, I think that's right. And it was, I think, under the scope of practice of nursing, where an exception was carved out for PCAs.
Yeah.
Okay, so help me understand the issue here then, because if you are suggesting that the scope of services that are already permitted for these agencies to perform includes all of the things that are listed here, including medication reminders, what is the issue? Who wants to weigh in with that? Michael.
Leslie, is the issue that only because it's homemaker and companion defined and PCA is not defined? I know there's language within the regulations that allows for the personal care, et cetera, but I guess I've always wondered if PCA should be defined.
PCAs are not defined in the Homemaker Companion Agency statutes. But the statute very clearly, again, not to beat a dead horse, but prohibits any kind of provision of health services or healthcare. And right now there's this conflict as a result because the law allows for PCAs to administer meds. So I think that's the real issue. If the law were changed so that PCAs very clearly could not provide any medical services, that probably would change our concern about this issue. I don't know if Pam, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, so they are able to do more than the medication reminder. And that's under, I don't know if anybody's here from DSS for the PCA, especially the PCA waiver program that can explain that, but the Homemaker Companions can only remind the client about it's time to take your medicine, but not put the medicine in their hand.
So in other words, Pam, if the law changed to prohibit PCAs from doing anything beyond reminders, I think that's a real issue there, right? Is there anything else?
Yes, that is a real issue.
I would have a concern about going down that road of changing the scope of practice for a profession based on this. But let me go to Michael and then Anna.
I'll just be really quick. I just wanted to add that 100% of the agencies, here's a big issue, 100% of the agencies, literally every single one, a person, a potential client makes a phone call, all agencies have Homemaker and companion pricing, and they have personal care pricing. So I just wanted to mention that, and that's a fact without question. So, definitely have to figure it out.
Okay, and the personal care pricing are all the assistance with the activities of daily living.
Right, it's always a little more, like usually $4 more per hour.
Okay. Anna, welcome to Anna and Mairead. By the way, thank you I know you had a meeting earlier, so we're glad that you were able to join us. So Anna, go ahead.
Yeah, again, sorry for being late and advance apologies for also needing to leave early. But I just wanted to, echo some of the big concerns about limiting the PCA scope of practice so that they would not be able to assist with medication distribution. We see a lot of family members who are involved, sometimes with that PCA waiver program, and I wouldn't want to do anything to cause complications, especially in that arena. So my preference would be to steer very clear of, that piece of the conversation.
Yeah, I agree. So I don't know, Leslie and Michael, you still have your hands up. Was there more that you wanted to say?
No, I'll just reinforce that, our concern is once we are regulating something that is a health service, we have no concerns. And the administering of meds is a provision of healthcare. So that's, sort of part of the real challenge we have is it seems like when HCAs were first established, or at least by law, the registration was required. Back in 2006, and then in effect, it took effect in 2008, I think. I don't think people sort of had the vision for what this would become, and what we're talking about sort of goes into this area where we we start to overlap with in the home when it comes to home care and this sort of the scope there. So I think that this is really at the heart of a huge issue that we continue to have. It's PCAs, administering meds. There's stuff down below that we'll talk about too with dementia care. Those are the issues. That's where DCP sort of our position is you're getting into an area where that really belongs at DPH. Those are health care provisions. And so that's the real challenge we have. And, you know,
Okay, thank you. And actually, sorry that DPH isn't here at this meeting to weigh in on this, but we have Mairead and then Tracy and then Sheldon.
Thank you. So I think everybody's kind of hitting on the same things, but with the PCAs, what I want to, when we're talking about administering meds, the PCA should be taking guidance from the person. It's a person-centered program where they are the hands for the person. For some reason, that person doesn't have the ability to do whatever the task is that they're asking the PCA. It's a personal care attendant, whatever they're attending to them. So they're not doing it in the same way. And that's why it's really important that the person who's directing the individual has the ability to give that instruction, and that they train their PCAs to do what maybe their own physical body can't do, but they're able to conceptualize and ask for. And it's really being the hands, not the head, if you think about it that way. I know that I want my socks and shoes put on, but I can't physically do that. I know that I want to pour the cup of medication into my hand, but I can't physically do that. I know what I'm taking. I'm the person deciding what to take. The PCA is physically completing the tasks that I can't physically complete myself. And I think that's different from when we're talking about a home health aide or an individual deciding that it's time for my medication and telling me to take something and handing it to me. Those are two very different things. And that's why if we change the scope of what a PCA can do, we will very dramatically impact individuals who are living independently in the community and instructing people on how to provide them with the physical assistance in order to best complete their day.
Thank you.
I appreciate that, but that's not what the law says. The law doesn't say, it says the administering of meds. And that is not just someone who's mentally with it, instructing someone because they don't have the physical ability to, you know, open the pill bottles themselves. That's not what the law says. What the law says is they can administer meds, and the definition of administering meds, it goes way beyond what you're describing.
So let me just direct everybody to Tracy, and I see you have your hand up, Tracy, and Tracy has put in the chat. Tracy, why don't I turn it over to you to explain what you have provided to everyone, which I think is on point here.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. And I actually think what Mairead just said was so well stated and very, very clear with examples. So this is the law. This is the section from the language that was passed in 2012. The act provides that nothing in the Nurse Practice Act can be construed to prohibit a PCA employed by a registered homemaker companion agency from administering medications to a competent adult who directs his or her own care and makes his or her own assessment, planning, and evaluation decisions. So like Mairead just said, be the hands, not the head. So I think, Leslie, I'm not sure if there's some other language that you're finding somewhere else that maybe makes it more permissible, but I think this really does only allow it for the competent adult who directs their own care.
I will, my recollection is that it is in the scope of nursing practice, the exception is there. Is that where you're looking? Because I have to go pull it up. I don't have it in front of me right now. I've looked at it.
I actually just pulled up the public act that was passed and signed in 2012.
Yeah. Give me a minute. I'll find what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So perhaps I'm reading this wrong, but to me, this suggests that this is maybe this first sub bullet here is maybe a non-issue, because it seems like all of this is already allowed within the scope of services permitted for homemaker companion agencies. Is that?
I would not agree with that at this point.
Okay, let's move on to Sheldon and then Pam.
Well, okay, I raised my hand about something else, but I have to say I completely agree also with Mairead's description of the way it is and should be. I have no problem with the statute, and I agree with what and just said, it sounds like we don't really need this because we already have a statute that deals with it. But what I raised my hand about was something more basic. And that is that when Leslie was just saying now, well, we don't want to go there because then it gets into the DPH regulation thing. So we don't want to do that. I want to skip ahead because we're already an hour into, look at how long this document is. And I'm going to go right to the very last big heading called Best Practices Nationwide. I have, after sitting through many of these meetings and the testimony and listening to all this, I am now persuaded that everything in that last section those are the most important things. The most important thing is to move this over to DPH, to properly fund it, and DPH should regulate Homemaker companions as they do other services. Because just that, and I understand what Leslie was saying, but that's exactly right. That's the problem. So we need to move it. I don't want to get into discussions about we can't do this or that or the other thing because that's DPH's role. I think this should all be DPH's role. So that's why I'm saying it both in response to what Leslie just said, but also because I'm worried we won't have time today. And I think it's like it's more important than just about anything else on the list.
Thank you, Sheldon. I appreciate that. And there may be others that I've heard from that don't agree with you, but I think you're pointing up that perhaps we're going to need to schedule a couple more meetings to fully vet all of these because yes, we're taking these in a certain order, but we really need to be looking at the whole of the recommendations. So let me turn it over to Pam now on this particular issue. Pam, what did you want to say about it?
And so I see as the director of investigation, the horror stories. So I often talk about, when we're visiting industries and agencies that they should not be having anyone administer medications such as insulin. We do see that. And especially when we're looking through the files, we'll see that this particular client is an Alzheimer or diagnosed with dementias, but they are getting their insulin or, sometimes pain medication. That homemaker or companion is having to decide whether or not they're going to be giving them a Tylenol versus maybe an opioid. And we've seen toxicity levels, and just people going to the hospital. So it's really something that we need to perhaps either move to DPH for regulation if we are going to allow this, or, really lower the level of what a PCA can do as far as the daily living activities. Thank you.
And I'll weigh in again. I think that's kind of a non-starter to roll back the scope of practice for PCAs. And I'm just, I don't know, I just keep going back to it. Seems clear to me that in the existing law, if the adult is competent in directing their own care, that the PCA can administer medications. Whether it's, I don't know, whether it's a aspirin or morphine, they're directing their own care. And if they have a prescription for that, it seems allowable under current law. So I guess I just want to direct back to the need for a change here. I'm not getting that there's a need to expand the scope of services, because it seems like existing law already gives the homemaker companion agencies the ability to have people go out and assist with activities of daily living and administer medication.
I just go back to, I think that, and I'm looking now at the Public Act, and I'm looking at our statutes as well, and the 20-679 as well, which talks about contracts or service plans under DSS's program. And the thing, it's none of it's consistent. So there's no, and at the end of the day, while the scope of practice says that this shall not be construed to prohibit PCAs employed by HCAs registered pursuant to 20-671 from administering meds to a competent adult who directs his or her own care and makes his or her own decisions pertaining to assessment, planning, and evaluation. There's nothing that aligns that in the DCP statutes. Nothing aligns with that. And the DCP statutes very clearly, again, talk about the provision of healthcare services being prohibited. The other thing I would say that I would be concerned about is how we're determining competency. Who's determining that? Because that's an issue that, not just with respect to this conversation, but we have everywhere. How do you determine if someone's competent? So what happens if a PCA there's a complaint about this that we have to deal with, where there's an argument that's made that the adult is not competent. So it gets into an area that makes it really challenging when we're dealing with investigations and complaints.
Okay. And again, I'm sorry DPH isn't here, because it maybe does go back to what Sheldon was suggesting is kind of a crux of all of this.
Especially, sorry, and I just want to say one other thing, I'm so sorry, but especially when below, we're going to talk about how also there's an argument that people want to advertise Alzheimer's, that the staff is trained for dementia care and Alzheimer's care. So again, there's just a lot here that sort of, to Sheldon's point, moves us into a realm that really probably doesn't belong with DCP. But, that's not my call or Pam's call or DCP's call, but it just seems like there's really a goal here to try to expand this in a way that doesn't fit so well with the Department of Consumer Protection.
Okay. So, so what I'm hearing, and just tell me if I'm wrong, is that the first sub-bullet under expand permitted services is not necessarily something that's needed. And perhaps what's needed is to make the statutes consistent. The one that Tracy has posted and the one that 20-679 that Leslie is referencing. Is that correct? Is that wrong? Please tell me.
Plus 20-670, which is the HCA statutes. So where the definitions include, means non-medical. So, but again, we have our comfort level with this is not good.
Okay. So, and Mairead has posted something helpful as well, that adults are presumed to be competent unless determined otherwise by the court. So it doesn't have to be DCP determining that people are competent to make their own decisions. But if there's a lack of a judge finding incompetency, that they're presumed to be competent.
I understand it's just a very dicey path, and that's not a simple investigation. If DCP has to deal with some of that, like that's complicated. That's my point.
Okay. So does anyone
and maybe with that sub bullet 1 there, it's not expand, it might just be
clarify?
Clarify or enunciate more clearly, because the way it's written currently, it's just very ambiguous and vague.
Okay. So Cameron, do you want to just, cross out? Okay, great. We can work with that. Okay. And then I didn't hear any objection to renaming Homemaker Companion. I was surprised to hear that we are the only state in the country that uses that name. So yes, if there's a name somebody likes, non-medical home service agencies is what Leslie suggested, rather than care, which I think actually makes sense because it's not medical care, but a service. So I think it would be deleting care. Yeah.
I kind of have an issue with that. And I understand Leslie's thoughts on that, but they're referred to as home care agencies throughout the country. Non-medical home care, and care does not insinuate medical. Care is care. Care could be I'm brushing someone's hair. Care could be I'm giving them a bath. Care does not necessarily mean, but it can, that I'm doing wound care. But then it would fall under home health care, because then you would have health in front of it. But home care is a term used throughout the country. And if you look at how other agencies are named in other states, they are named home care agencies.
That's true. It's kind of a name across the industry.
That's helpful. Pam, did you want to weigh in on that?
I was just going to say non-medical homemaker companion agency, still keeping what we have, homemaker companion agency, just putting the non-medical in front of it.
I think that the concern is the use of homemaker companion.
Yeah.
That it's strange.
That whole nomenclature kind of dumbs down the industry.
And it also, I think, restricts us for where we're headed with our demographics and the focus of keeping people in their home, and whatever other roles may develop over time. You know, we already know PCA is a role that's well known throughout the country, yet it's not defined within the current Connecticut regulations. So I strongly promote non-medical home care agencies, and I also strongly promote not expanding the scope as Mark had said, but maybe defining PCA within. And I know Leslie has concerns over that because of the medication issue, but I think if we can get all that clarified, we should be able to put forward a definition of PCA, which is actually within the homemaker. It's within the language of what a homemaker companion agency can do. It's just not defined as a PCA, and the PCA that all of us know exists.
And we also need to define PCA. Is it going to be personal care attendant or personal care assistant? Because we see it in different places written differently.
Yeah, and I think we need some advice from DSS and DPH on that.
I agree. I think DPH and DSS need to be part of that conversation, but I also think, again, not to sound like a broken record, but this is because, I mean, what we're dealing with is something that started at the reason we started with homemaker and companion agencies was because there was a different scope in mind that's now already expanded. And my point is that because it's expanded and it continue, and there's a desire from the industry to continue to expand it, and we're going to talk more about that soon. It's a real challenge for DCP, and you know, because we're getting into a place where there's a gray area, which sort of gets into healthcare, and so I understand the need for this. I do, but I again think that what we're talking about is way beyond, or at least somewhat beyond, and probably will continue to expand beyond what the original vision was for a homemaker and companion agencies back in 2006.
Yeah, that's a good thing, I think. So, just back to the issue, Senator Miller, I see you have your hand up. Do you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So part of the legislative intent for this task force was to prevent the confusion, right? To diffuse the confusion that the public has regarding this industry. And I, like Leslie, feel that if we use care, the word care, it's going to go back to people thinking that it's medical care, you're offering all these care. So it is a warm and fuzzy title, but I think we need to differentiate, right, between home health care. And I think that services is a good idea, that we need to use another word instead of care is to use services, because there is confusion. And I even stated that I was confused about the home health care. I thought they did more than they were supposed to do. And so it's about educating the public, and the public not having to go to a website or someone or a guidebook to find out, to know exactly what the person does if they don't have to. But I think the title of what this industry is very important. And so I know that home care, it is care, I agree with you, but you're also providing a service as well. Thank you.
And that's the reason we have non-medical, though. That's really the clarifying term rather than care. Home health care is home health care, and non-medical home care is non-medical home care. So that's where we differentiate.
I just think a lot of people don't know what is considered medical and what is not.
Chris, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, thank you. As someone who's recently had to help get both, a higher level of care and more of a homemaker companion care for my parents, I think, and I consider myself to be a well-educated person, it's confusing no matter what. And knowing the difference only comes from being in that process and being explained to what certain people can do and what certain people can't do. So I don't think the word service or care, honestly, is going to make that much of a difference to the consumer. I think some of this comes in when that education is happening as you're seeking out services, and that things are clearly defined through that process.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. That's helpful. And I see you put in the chat that you did support the phrase non-medical home care agency. I think what we should do for now in order to move on is just to say care or service. Let's move on. We know we want one of those words in there, and I think we can swing back to it, but I don't want to spend too much time on that one issue. So let's go forward to enhanced monitoring of caregivers by the agencies themselves. This is not by the state. This is requiring by statute or some other rule that the agencies themselves provide more oversight of staff than perhaps they are now. And the three items that came up in that regard were that the agents, that should be agency oversight staff, which are required to visit the client more frequently. I don't know if they already are. The agencies should be required, and these were things that came directly from the testimony, and nobody in the last meeting said, no, we should cross this off the list. So that's why it continues to be here. If we want to cross them off the list, we should talk about that. But agencies being required to relate client needs to the service providers. And perhaps they already do that, and perhaps they're already mandated to do that, but that was one of the recommendations. And then the last one, requiring that the agencies assure the clients that their service providers' training and experience level is suited to meet the client's needs. Those were all things that were recommended through the public hearing. And so we need to just make a decision whether this is something that's we want to put forward or not. So I'll just throw that out there. And since nobody's raising their hand.
Yeah, the only question I have is sub-bullet 2. It just seems a little bit squishy. I don't know how you would test it for compliance.
Yeah, I would agree
Right.
with what the second.
I mean, the training one, if I'm doing personal care, hopefully we'll have a certification that relates to doing personal care in a home. So I can see sub-bullet 3 being auditable. Same with sub-bullet 1, I mean, sub-bullet 2 also, speaking for private pay agencies, if we don't do this, we don't keep the client. So, the fact that we're doing what the client wants us to do is the reason we're there. So now maybe they have issues on the Medicaid side, but again, I don't know how you're gonna audit that.
Tracy and Leslie both have their hands up, so let's hear what they have to say.
Yeah, I agree with Mark, and I guess, should there be oversight? I think any quality homemaker companion agency has oversight in place, has, some level of communication with the client and or the responsible party for that client, and going over the plan of care and what's, all those pieces. A quality agency would have that in place. So now we're talking about, okay, well, what about the non-quality agencies, if there are some there? So how do we, without doing some broad brush approach, how do we put something in place that might be reasonable? And I'm not so sure visiting the client more frequently versus, touching base with them. There's other ways of following up with family members and with clients. It doesn't necessarily have to be a visit. Yes, a surprise visit once in a while is a good thing. But to regulate that, I'm trying to figure how it would look. So, and then the whole plan of care piece, I think that was part of it. I think Mark's right in the second bullet about should be required to relate client needs to homemaker companions. That all has to do with setting up the plan of care and ensuring that the staff understand how to carry it out.
You could change that to like, there'll be a plan of care will be maintained in the client's home that the client has signed or whatever, and therefore they know what care they're getting.
And
And
that's not currently a requirement, Mark?
No, that's not required. There's none of those types of requirements currently. How frequently a care plan needs to be updated, I don't think.
So
how often you would visit a client or even communicate with them.
So would there be any objection if we deleted the second bullet and replaced it with what Mark's suggesting about a plan of care must be maintained at the client's home?
Yeah, a current plan of care.
Read what Mairead put in the
So I'll read it aloud
that's good.
for those who can't see it. Could we indicate that there should be choice in a person-centered way? Client and client representative will develop expectations regarding visits, team meetings, and check-ins. Client representative being, what does that mean?
Could be the
Could be a
client
son
or
or
the
daughter.
responsible party for the client.
That's
okay.
spoken so much. That's the
Okay.
more federal terminology that they're moving instead of resident, responsible party, resident they're representing resident.
Okay.
Sorry,
That-
and that
That's
a lot of
another
the
one. I just don't
language-
see how you audit it.
Yeah, that,
I don't
These
know
are
how you
all-
wanted it, but that's what we're, even on the nursing home side, even in the most skilled settings, the person-centered plan of care. I think we need to make sure that any language that we're moving forward is representative of current language instead of using some of maybe the older language in on the record that, person-centered plans of care, how the person sees their best day, and the accountability related to whoever's providing that. What is the responsibility of family, of non-paid care, and then agencies that are in, and what that looks like.
I see that both Leslie and Pam have their hands up. I do. Would you like to weigh in on this?
Pam, you go.
Just, placing a plan of care in someone's home is a great idea. However, oftentimes we see that it's the son or daughter who does not reside within the home that is actually paying the bill and actually filing the complaint. So, and then also if you have someone with Alzheimer's and dementia, that's just a piece of paper sitting in the home. So I think it really, as I believe Marie also stated, client representative is important to make sure that that plan of care gets to the person who's doing the hiring so that they have an understanding. Also, when we do audits, we see that some agencies have daily activity sheets so that the companion or the homemaker has to check off all of these things that they're required to do. Maybe Monday and Tuesday, they're doing laundry. They're taking them to bridge on Wednesday so that they're checking off that all of these activities that they're supposed to do is taken care of and it's actually maintained either on site or in their file. They have to turn them in when they pick up their paychecks. So we do see that when we audit some of the agencies. I just want to throw that out there. Thank you.
So can you just clarify for me, Pam, plans of care are already required?
They're not required. I'm just saying if you leave them in the home, it's not going to do any good. If the person has Alzheimer's or dementia, it needs to go to the client representative so that they know what to expect. Especially if you have someone with a cognitive decline, it's just a piece of paper in their home. They're not going to know what the services that are going to be rendered. So I think that it should be stated to the client and or client representative. The plan of care should be given to one or both.
Okay, so it seems to me, okay, so Maria?
Thanks. Just a quick note. So we do actually have to have a plan of care defined and written and given to the client. And I think, as Pam said, it's not always the client, it's whatever family member or whoever is managing the care for that client. Leaving it in the home is great, but it really doesn't realistically always work. So, and I think that is a requirement. I believe that we do have to get that written plan of care out within, I think, 7 days of signing a contract.
It's actually, yes, it's actually called a service agreement under the statute.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so then I guess the question is, do we want to add something along the lines of what Mairead is suggesting, that the client or client representative will, I don't know how the client or client representative do that without working with the agency.
That is what it would be, to convey their needs and desires, and you'd work with the agency, help them understand what it is you want for the client.
Okay.
I think historically it may have been seen as like the contract between the provider and the individual, where there's been a lot of growth in that area. And now it is seen as the person-centered plan of care. It is a care plan team. The team consists of, when they're looking at this, either on the waiver or when things are getting assigned, it's who the individual sees as their care team, right? It could be a family member, a friend, paid staff, and having an understanding of who is doing what needs to be well laid out in that plan.
Okay, so, and it seems like it's called a service agreement in this regard, and that's what Pam said. So maybe there's a recommendation that the service agreement must include, and now I've missed where Mairead said it before, expectations regarding visits, team meetings, and check-ins, and it's developed in conjunction with the client or client representative.
Pam or Leslie, maybe you can provide the current language or requirement for the service agreement. Maybe we can use that as a jump start to what we might be able to enhance.
The service agreement is really just the contract, that's the client, that's
what I
I'm going to
thought.
provide you X number of hours a week at X dollars an hour to this client. Notice periods, things. It doesn't have anything to do with a plan of care. And I'd also, I don't think we should be putting language in here like you're going to agree on check-ins, and I mean, either they're going to be mandated by law, or you can't have, oh my God, you didn't follow, there's a note here that you were going to check in with the daughter every other day, and that didn't happen. That's just craziness.
Okay, so maybe what we need to do is to mandate that there be a care plan, because apparently there isn't. And that it needs to include visits, frequency of visits, that kind of thing.
I would just say, again, this goes back to I know I don't want to be difficult and I apologize, but the issue of service versus care. There's a reason the current law says service agreement and not care plan, I think. And it goes back to so if we're changing the language and requiring, a care plan within the service agreement, that again, we have to acknowledge that sort of goes into this area that perhaps confuses people about what the scope is of these agencies.
It doesn't.
It can, depending on the language, it certainly could. This is an issue we have. The word care is a challenge. And it has been an issue for DCP. So a person-centered plan of care and services. I don't know. Anyway, I'm just flagging it. There's a reason it's currently a service agreement, and it's because of, what the original intent was of the law, I think.
Okay, well, let's leave that as it is, and we can come back to it at a later date. The third bullet there, I had some concerns about that. I don't know if anybody thinks that that's important to move forward with, or is that something that we can address if we're looking back at this person-centered plan of care and services. Should we get that off the table? Leslie, you still have your hand up. Is that just because it's up?
This assumes that training is required. And I think, I don't know, it seems like there's something missing here. And if there is going to be a level of training that's required, et cetera, then, that's a huge undertaking.
Does anybody want to keep this on here? Chris?
I echo what Leslie said. I think that depends a lot on what happens with the training piece that's lower in on this list of components. If there's a basic training that all caregivers need to, service providers, whatever word we're going to use, need to go through, then I don't know that written in that way is necessary. But maybe to just say that they're homemaker companion service provider care, I know we might be using different words, that they've been trained.
Okay, so maybe we delete it here and then we address it under the training piece.
That makes sense.
Okay, great. All right, so the next area is enhancing, just in general, enhancing the state oversight of quality of services. And that, I guess, has two pieces, one of which is whether it's DCP or DPH, whoever is going to have regulatory oversight of the industry needs more resources. It's clear that the resources that are currently available are not providing the level of oversight that that the industry, that the consumers, that the family members, nobody seems overjoyed with what's happening, and more resources are necessary. I think that first bullet is self-explanatory. And then the second one was, it was my understanding that somebody noted that the community, that there was some language to increase the community ombudsman program in the Department of Aging and Disability Services, and that got switched at the end to be just, within available appropriations. And those of us who are familiar with the state budget understand that there was no money put in to expand that program. So one of the recommendations that was made to us was to provide additional resources for that particular program. So I don't know if anybody wants to weigh in on either or both of those recommendations.
It's Tracy. I definitely agree with bullet one, but I think we've already talked about that. We've got to figure out a way to make sure the resources are there so that oversight can be more consistent. And as far as fully funding the community ombudsman program, all they did put one full-time position in place, but I don't think anything has been developed yet. So one full-time position for not just the 903 homemaker companion agencies, but all of home health, all of hospice, and all of self-directed care. So we do have to figure out what we're doing there if we're actually going to have a program.
Okay, so should we leave these two? Oh, Senator Miller.
Yes, I had a question. What does fully fund look like?
Mairead, Mairead, you do have your hand up. Great. Can you
Sure.
talk about that?
So we're not exactly sure what fully funds looks like right now. For the moment, the one position, which should be posting at some point, we'll start that program writing what the expectations are, the scope, and once that moves forward and we can start to see what level of complaints we have. For example, residential care homes and assisted living technically can be considered community. And so we're going to look at what are the levels of complaints we get there related to home care services. As we put things out, it would be something that we would think would need to grow over time. I think the entire program had 12 regional ombudsmen that were associated with it as appropriations are available and move forward. We're also waiting to see what our federal appropriations look like and if there's any availability in that way for continuous money, right? We can't do much in the way of positions with one-time money, but continuous money in order to support individuals who are choosing to receive those long-term services and supports in the community. And then there's also some other funding ideas that we can talk about. But I think if we were talking about really having robust community ombudsman teams, it would be the 12 ROs throughout the state.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any further discussion on this item? Okay, the next recommendation that came forward was employees' observations should be written down and available for review by the state and consumers. I'd like to hear if people think that that's something. I would be concerned about that, but let me just ask, is there any concern about that, or actually maybe people think that's a great idea? Is that standard practice in home health care, Tracy?
Yes, it is. The nurses, the LPNs, the social workers, whoever's in the home, if there's something that is observed, it's to be documented and, perhaps change a condition, who's to be notified, the physician, it becomes it's a medical model.
Okay. Well, we're taking care to say this is not a medical service. But, so Senator Miller and Mairead, you both still have your hands up. Are you wanting to talk about this issue?
Well, I didn't, but since my hand is up, I have a question. So it's not medical, but what happens if you have a home health you have a companion in the house, in the home, and there is a change. They notice that the person is forgetting things, and there may be early onset of Alzheimer's, or they're becoming a little more feeble. If you don't have some observation written down or require the homemaker to write some type of observation, then how do we catch something like that, right? I mean, I know that's not their job. They're there for homemaker services, but someone who's in the house on a regular basis, I think that should be something that we may want to ask them to do. That if they see there's a change in behavior, physically, mentally, whatever, that it be written down, since that's something that homemakers do, not homemakers, home health aides do. So we really wouldn't be reinventing the wheel for agencies. Thank you. So it's just a thought.
Thank you. Michael?
Our caregivers are required to write daily care notes, and they submit them to the office each week. But obviously, if there's something happening that they really notice there's an issue or problem, their job is, of course, to immediately contact the office and explain to us what's going on. But aside from that, just the daily care, we do have a care plan. Every single day they have to write observations and what's going on, and they submit them to the office at the end of each week, or at the end of their case.
Okay.
I'm sorry, is that for your homemakers? I'm sorry, Madam Chair, is that for your homemakers and companions?
Yes, everyone.
Is that required? Okay. Is it done throughout the
That's-
industry?
I would hope so, right, Mark? I mean, I'm sure, daily notes, daily care notes.
So
Yeah, I
maybe,
mean, it's not required, but I mean, a lot of agencies do it. We do it. And you talked about, Senator Miller, you were talking about change of condition. It really is the caregiver's responsibility to be looking out for change of conditions and notifying the office of any concerns they have. And then we would send a care coordinator out there to kind of evaluate it. So, but both are useful tools.
okay, so Tracy and then Pam?
Yeah, I was going to agree with what Mark and Michael said, and is it mandated? No, but it is industry standard to document what they're doing in the home and to notify the office if there's a change, a fall, or if something happened. But for the state funded waiver clients receiving services through Homemaker Companions, just to remind everybody, there is an EVV process, and they have to document their tasks on that. And there's a direct connection to the area on aging, the access agency, if there is a change. So the care manager is notified too.
Okay.
But that's for EVV, that's for the Medicaid state funded. That's not for private pay.
Right. Pam?
And just basically, I don't see that industry-wide, what Mark is saying, how he runs his business, which is the gold standard, where they're taking notes, and if they see a change in condition, they notify the agency, and the agency sends someone out. I think that not only should they be writing it down, but they should be reporting it to the agency, and perhaps the agency should be made to follow through if there is a change in condition.
Okay, so sounds like we want to keep this one.
Mhm.
Okay, great. Okay, so then the next one is that the state, whether that's DPH or another agency, should develop and make available a model service agreement. So what, and maybe I would ask Pam, Tracy, I see you still have your hand up. Is that on this one? No. Okay, Pam, just wondering what your thoughts are about that idea.
Sure, we can create a model service agreement. We actually have a template that we use for our investigators when they go out and to do an audit. We have a sample service agreement, but it also on the side, because we had a lot of changes with the statute when that particular statute went in effect. So as they're going through the service agreement, they're able to just make sure that that contract or a service agreement is in compliance or it's not. But we simply we have one that we can actually provide. We do sample contracts for other industries. We can do something in this area.
Okay, great. All right, so anything else in this particular area before we, oh, Michael.
I'll just make it really quick. As I have stated before, I was audited, and they were here just about the entire day, and there was a lot of issues with my service agreement. Most of the issues were because of my franchisor didn't correctly have everything in place. There was a lot of issues with that, but in saying that, I was bouncing back and forth. I was trying to figure it out myself. I had really no go-to place to get an understanding or the answers for what I was being asked for, and eventually the DCP requested me to hire an attorney, which cost me thousands of dollars. And even by hiring an attorney, it took like 4 to 6 months going back and forth. And I have it right in front of me here. And it's ended up being, it's probably the most compliant service agreement in the state. It's like I said, it took 4 to 6 months, and it's literally 6.5 pages long. So I had a lot of my friends in the industry forward me their service agreements, and every single one, maybe 6 or 7 agency owners, every single one varied in language, varied in length. To me, they weren't certainly compliant to what Department of Consumer Protection was asking me to do. But that's one of the reasons why I raised this issue, that perhaps there should be some sort of quote unquote model contract, because I firmly believe that many agencies are not compliant with their service agreements.
Okay, great. Okay, so it seems like we're all in agreement that this should stay as a recommendation. Okay, so Sheldon was right, as always. We're creeping through these recommendations and haven't gotten to many of the meatiest recommendations, and it is 1:45. So I just wanted to stop here and talk about process for a moment, which is that we currently, today is December 2nd, and we currently have one more meeting scheduled in 2 weeks from today, from noon to 2 on Friday the 16th. I think it seems pretty clear that we won't be able to finish our business in that meeting. I'm just wondering, in general, how folks feel about adding some more meetings, lengthening meetings. And I assume that Senator Miller would be okay if we had to push back our when we submit our report by a couple of weeks. But I guess the immediate question I wanted to ask you is that we're not meeting next Friday. I don't know if that's an ability for people to add a meeting at noon next Friday, and or lengthen the meeting on the 16th. So can I just ask that while we're all together, about whether there are folks that we would not be able to come next Friday at noon for a bit, or lengthen the meeting on the 16th. Is everybody okay with that?
I'm not around next week.
Okay, and Mairead just said she could not do either of those things.
I can lengthen on the 16th on either side if we start earlier or go a little longer.
Okay. And Mairead, I guess, was not able to make the meeting at all on the 16th. Is that right, Mairead? You weren't going to meet at any?
No, I'm not. maybe for a few minutes where I can pop in and out. Seems like everything goes on the same days.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so if we could lengthen the meeting on the 16th, I think that would be a start. And then I would ask Cameron maybe to survey people for, I guess we have to go after the holidays. Are people available that week in between the holidays, or no? I'm assuming a lot of people are off that week. Well, Cameron can survey you all, but who would we lose? We're going to lose Mairead anyway on the 16th. Who would we lose if we extended the 16th for an hour on either side? Anybody? Nobody.
You'd lose me
Who?
on
I'm
the
sorry.
16th, Chris. This is Chris.
Okay, we'd lose you either before or after.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll have to talk to Mark and Cameron about what we do. It's obviously that we need more time. And my preference is to front load it to try and get this done. Senator Miller has the session starting, I think in early January. You know, she can hold off raising a bill, but I think the sooner we can get her something, the better it will be for all of us, frankly, because we don't want to be trying to submit something in February when we've kind of missed our opportunity. So I know we're going to miss Chris next week, but maybe we could ask people to save as much time. I mean, on the 16th, save as much time as you can. And we could go over on the 16th, run late. And we'll just see if we can do that. So I would just ask people to try to hold 3 hours anyway on the 16th. The issue is some of the things that are coming up are fairly meaty issues. We're going to need some time. So let's try to hold 12 to 3 on the 16th, and then Cameron will get us some dates that work for the majority of us in the first weeks of January. And maybe we end up, we certainly would have to meet on a weekly basis, at least I think a couple more meetings, but let's see. Okay, so 10 more minutes. Should we keep going forward and see if we can knock off Senator Miller?
Madam Chair, I have a question. Is it possible on the 16th that we can start earlier than 12? Can you canvass that? Could you possibly canvass
certainly.
whether we can start earlier on the 16th that we're going to extend it?
Yeah, definitely. Do people, I mean, would you want to start at 10 and we can just go, oh, Tracy likes, oh, people like that. Okay. Let's meet at 10. I'm not hearing anybody say no. That's terrific. Let's meet at 10 on the 16th, and everybody's holding till 2. So maybe we just do a marathon meeting, and Cameron can set up a meeting for early January as a backup. And hopefully with 4 hours, maybe we can get through everything else that we need to get through.
We can have a virtual lunch together.
Right. Right. Yes, Sheldon.
I think that we need to have another meeting. We will, even with the marathon, because what's going to happen is there's going to be, okay, we need some language on that. Okay, well, let's just see that, how it looks. And somebody has to research something. I just can't see how that could possibly be realistic without at least one other meeting.
Agreed. Okay. So we will set something up, at least one other meeting in early January, and maybe 2 meetings in early January, and maybe we can even, set them up as 3-hour meetings. And so we're sure to hold enough time to do this. Mairead, did you want to say something?
Is it possible to do the same thing for next week for like the 9th in the morning? Do like a 10 to 12 to get something?
That's
Oh,
that's
yeah.
MAPOC.
Oh,
Sorry.
Okay, just thought I would try.
I mean, that only impacts me, I guess, on the group. If I look at it, I mean, Sheldon's usually there.
Yeah, and I don't know, Senator Miller, you have your hand up. Did you want to? You're
Or
muted.
my hand's not up. I forgot to lower it. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Okay, so yeah, I don't know, we would lose Tracy.
I mean, I can listen to it afterwards and offer my thoughts if you want to go ahead and meet. And then I'll listen to it. I'll have one of my lobbyists cover the meeting too.
Okay, what are people's thoughts? Mark, others, you know, I hate to schedule a meeting knowing that someone can't come, but I think it would be great to knock some of this off.
What was the date of that meeting?
Next Friday.
Oh, yeah, I'm out of town as well, so
Oh, okay. Okay.
I put that in the chat.
Right, then I'm not going to do it without Mark. So let's stick to the 16th for a meeting from 10 to 2. And then Cameron will get a couple of dates on the calendar for early January for us. Okay, so at this point we have 7 minutes. Is it worthwhile to dive into anything, or we just break here? Is there anything else anyone wanted to raise as a burning issue? Yeah, Sheldon?
I did previously ask that DCP provide some data about the complaints in terms of how long it's taking, how many are still pending out of the 49 filed since 2021. But just to be clear, I mean, everybody's made it very clear that it's just too much. I mean, that they just don't have the resources. 2 people, it's not realistic. And my only reason for I think wanting that information is to make the case, because if we're going to write a report, if you're going to write a report that says we need this, you sort of have to have your backup for why that is. So we have, if we have, yeah, only 2 cases have been resolved in the last 2 years because of the lack of resources. Average cases are pending around, you know, a year and a half, whatever. That it might make the case. Oh, I just see a message from Leslie. I have sent the information that Sheldon requested. Okay. Okay, thanks.
So that should be, I think it was sent to Cameron, and so he will be able to get it out to everybody. Is that right?
Thank you very much.
Okay. Christy?
Yeah, I was holding my comments today, but we didn't get to the training piece, but I just wanted to note, and I know it was suggested earlier, that for the recommendations we covered today, it may be helpful to just note next to them. I know this was covered with fiscal note, but you might want to also say may require legislation / fiscal note. I think if you delineate both, and I've been on other task forces, it would be clear then when the full recommendation comes out, it's their recommendations that we'd move forward with legislation and would have a cost, or could just something that we could just simply implement. I think it's helpful to note both.
Okay, that's a great idea, and we can work with DCP to identify those places before we send it out to everybody. Okay, Senator Miller.
It's me again. Christy, I'm glad that you spoke because I thought about the legislation that you worked on, right? And it was a clear example of you giving, submitting legislation to the aging committee without funding. There was no funding available at the time. And so we went ahead and passed it out of committee. And then we worked on the funding on the back end.
Right.
And so that's just how it works. And that's why I was saying not to ignore the fact that we need the funding, but don't let that stop us from doing the work that we need to do.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. Okay, anything else? By the way, Cameron just sent out by email the information that Leslie gave him today. So we should have that to look forward to. And I want to thank you all for your patience and your focus and your dedication to moving forward as slowly as we're going on this together. So, Mark, was there anything that you wanted to say with regard to any closing comments? I see Mark turned his
Yeah,
camera
he
off.
might be off. Yeah.
Okay, so if there's nothing else, then we will plan to get together on Friday, the 16th of January at 10 a.m., which is a change, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., and get through as much as we can. And Cameron will reach out for additional meetings in January. And again, thank you very much. I appreciate everybody weighing in and participating on this important subject.
Madam Chair, just for clarification on the record, since we're being recorded, you said December, the 16th of January.
Oh,
is our
I'm so
next
sorry.
meeting.
I'm so
We know
sorry.
what you, no, we know what you meant, but just to clarify for the public.
Yes, for the public, it will be Friday, December 16th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And I assume that will be covered on CTN. So thank you very much for catching that.
Thank
Okay.
you, Madam Chair.
So I hope
Thank you,
everybody
Mark, as
has a
well.
good 2 weeks. All right, we'll talk to you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.